أعزائي المشاهدين مساء الخير. سامحوني من فضلكم، فقد طرأ تعديل بسيط على خطة حلقة الليلة. كنت قد وعدت في الحلقة الماضية أنني سأستكمل في هذه الحلقة عرض رائعة هيتشكوك، والتي أعيدت إلى الحياة بتقنية عالية بالصوت والصورة في عام 1996، الدوامة أو الدوار. وهذا وعد لا مناص منه سيتحقق في خلال دقائق إن شاء الله. أما الوعد الذي لن يتحقق في هذه الحلقة فهو استكمال عرض الفيلم الخاص الكون الصغير ساكن العشب مايكروكوزموس، والذي فاز بجائزة خاصة من لجنة تحكيم مهرجان كان السينمائي الدولي في عام 1996 أيضا، إذ أنني سأضطر إلى تأجيل عرضه إلى مناسبة لاحقة، حيث أنني سأعرض الليلة بدلا منه فيلما قصيرا عن الكيفية التي تم بها إنقاذ تحفة هيتشكوك من الضياع وإعادتها إلى الشاشة العملاقة 70 ملم لجمهور جديد من جيل جديد. هذا علاوة على أجزاء من مقدمات أو إشارات لبعض أفلام هيتشكوك والتي قدمها بنفسه وتجلى فيها أسلوبه الساخر في التعليق على أفلامه، أو تلك التي صنعها الاستوديو كهذه المقدمة التالية التي أعلنت عن عرض الفيلم العرض الأول في عام 1958.
Vertigo, a feeling of dizziness, a swimming in the head. Figuratively, a state in which all things seem to be engulfed in a whirlpool of terror, as created by Alfred Hitchcock in the story that gives new meaning to the word suspense.
I don't want to die. There's someone inside me and she says I must die. Scotty, don't let me go.
A beautiful girl haunted by the desperate, unexplainable urge to destroy herself. A man possessed by the paralyzing vertigo that made him afraid of high places.
Easy now.
Oh, no. Well, it's a cinch. Here, I look up, I look down. I look up, I look...
What was the strange attraction that brought these two together in spite of the dark forces that tore them apart? The specter from the past that drew her to the ancient headstone in the mission graveyard. The compulsion that drove her relentlessly to the point of no return. The story of a love so powerful it broke down all barriers between past and present, between life and death, between the golden girl in the dark tower and the tawdry redhead that he tried to remake in her image.
If I let you change me, will that do it? If I do what you tell me, will you love me?
Yes.
All right. All right, then I'll do it. Because I don't care anymore about me.
ألفريد جوزيف هيتشكوك، المولود في 13 أغسطس عام 1899 والمتوفي في 29 أبريل عام 1980 عن 53 فيلما. كان صانع الأفلام الوحيد في العالم الذي مارس نظرية سينما المؤلف، أي الذي يضع التصور الفكري والتقني لفيلمه بالكامل على الورق قبل أن يصوره مساعدوه كما يريده هو. مارسها قبل الإعلان عن هذه النظرية رسميا في أدبيات النقد السينمائي الفرنسي ب20 عاما على الأقل. عن هذه النقطة كتب الناقد البريطاني لارس براس يقول في مجلة سايت أند ساوند: يعلن هيتشكوك أنه لا يهتم بأي شيء يتعلق بالحقيقة المادية لصنع الأفلام، وأن جوهر العمل الإبداعي يتم تحضيره قبل الذهاب إلى موقع التصوير. والآن ماذا يعني اسم هيتشكوك لنا وللآخرين وللملايين من الملايين من المشاهدين عبر شاشات العالم؟ البعض سيقول على الفور أن اسمه يعني إثارة أحاسيس رعب وقلق توتر خوف تشويق. هذا صحيح، وهو ما يمكن أن نسميه المدخل الأول إلى عالم هيتشكوك. ولنسميه المدخل الشعبي الذي عرفه من خلاله ملايين الملايين من المشاهدين، وهو المدخل الذي دخل منه هيتشكوك أيضا إلى ساحة المليونيرات في هوليوود، حتى صار الشريك الثالث من حيث الحجم، حجم الثروة والأسهم في شركة MCA السينمائية الأمريكية العملاقة.
Ladies and gentlemen, the famous Miss Doris Day has gladly consented to sing a few songs for us tonight.
Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera.
You're right, that was a gunshot you heard. That was the signal that brought all the trouble out into the open. It's a scene from our new picture, The Man Who Knew Too Much. As you know, Alfred Hitchcock has an uncanny knack for coming up with the unusual in entertainment. Well, The Man Who Knew Too Much can certainly be put in that category. I play the part of an American doctor. Doris Day is my wife. And the story is about our trip abroad that started out as a holiday and ended up as a nightmare. And to film it, Hitchcock took us thousands of miles away from Hollywood to Marrakesh, which is right in the center of the North African trouble area. And that was just the beginning. From there, we flew to London for backgrounds of a whole strange series of events that ended up that final night in the great concert hall, where the cue for murder was one single crash of the cymbals.
المدخل الثاني يرى فيه هيتشكوك بالإضافة إلى الأحاسيس والحقائق السابق ذكرها فنانا سينمائيا فذا خلق بذاته نوعا من السينما هو نوع التشويق، ويرى فيه أنصاره أن هيتشكوك هو سيد التشويق بلا منازع في القرن العشرين، وأن معدهم من مخرجي هذا النوع هم مجرد تلاميذ مجتهدين في أحسن الأحوال. ولكن حقيقة الأمر هي أن أفلام هيتشكوك لم تقدم مرة واحدة رعبا رخيصا مثيرا للغثيان مثلما يفعلون الآن، ومثلما فعل برايان دي بالما في أفلامه الأولى حين كان يعتبر نفسه تلميذا لهذا المعلم. ويحضرني هنا مقال طريف ساخر للناقد كريس بيشمان بعنوان 12 نصيحة لمقلدي هيتشكوك، والنصيحة رقم 13 هي لا تحاولوا تقليده. كتب يقول في النصيحة الرابعة: لا تكون برايان دي بالما. فبرايان دي بالما ضيع المسكين أكثر من نصف حياته الفنية وهو يحاول اقتفاء خطى أستاذه هيتشكوك. وتحتوي إعادته لفيلم الدوامة في فيلم استحواذ فيلم برايان دي بالما على حبكة قابلة للتصديق عن الأمل من خلال قصة أب يتعلق بابنته التي لم يرها منذ ولادتها، ولكنه في بديل الجسد حاول أن يدمج بين النافذة الخلفية والدوامة، ولكنه هجر تقليد هيتشكوك في النهاية عندما أخرج الوجه ذو الندبة. استطاع أن ينجز الفكرة الصحيحة للرعب البارد. وقد عبر هيتشكوك نفسه عن روح أصيلة للسخرية عندما كان يقدم أفلامه كما فعل في سايكو.
Here we have a quiet little motel tucked away off the main highway, and as you see, perfectly harmless looking, when in fact it has now become known as the scene of the crime. This motel also has, as an adjunct, an old house, which is, if I may say so, a little more sinister looking, less innocent than the motel itself. And in this house, the most dire, horrible events took place. I think we can go inside because the place is up for sale, although I don't know who's going to buy it now. This young man, you had to feel sorry for him. After all, being dominated by an almost maniacal woman was enough to drive anyone to the extreme of, well, let's go in. Well, I suppose you'd call this his hideaway. His hobby, as you see, was taxidermy. Crow here, an owl there. Now, an important scene took place in this room. There was a private supper here. And, oh, by the way, this picture has great significance because, let's go along to cabin number 1. I want to show you something there. All tidied up. The bathroom. Well, they've cleaned all this up now. Big difference. You should have seen the blood. The whole place was, well, it's too horrible to describe. Dreadful. And I'll tell you, there's a very important clue was found here. Down there. Well, the murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on, there was no sound. And,
ويوفر المدخل النقدي الفني لأفلام هيتشكوك إمكانية الاقتراب من عالمه حين يربط تارة بينه وبين الحركة التعبيرية في السينما الألمانية في العشرينات، والتي تميزت باللعب بالضوء والظلال لكشف وتجسيد الجوانب المظلمة من النفس البشرية، خاصة وأن هيتشكوك قد عمل فترة في استديوهات أوفا في ألمانيا في منتصف العشرينات، وتارة أخرى يراه فيلسوفا سينمائيا يعامل الخير والشر كغريزتين عليه أن يجسدهما للإنسان على الشاشة حتى تتطهر ذاته وتتحرر. وهذا المدخل رآه معظم نجوم الموجة الفرنسية الجديدة في نهاية الخمسينات من أمثال كلود شابرول وإيريك روم في كتابهما هيتشكوك، ومثل فرانسوا تروفو الذي نشر كتابا بنفس العنوان يتضمن حوارا طويلا بينه وبين هيتشكوك.
I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month? Please. Sorry. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley changed my life completely, and the lives of 7 others. Janet Walker, Henry Kentley, the boy's father, his aunt, Mrs. Atwater, his best friend, Kenneth Lawrence, a housekeeper named Mrs. Wilson, and the 2 who were responsible for everything, Brandon Shaw and Philip Morgan.
Cat and mouse.
Philip.
I wish
which is the cat and which is the mouse.
That's enough of that.
He's got it. He knows. He knows. All right, he knows. Easy, I'll take care of you. Won't. I'd just as soon kill you as kill him.
المدخل الثالث وربما الأخير هو المدخل الذي دخل منه هيتشكوك نفسه إلى عالمه. فألفريد هيتشكوك الذي ولد في لندن لأسرة تقع في نهاية سلم الطبقة الوسطى يعتبر أن حادثة معينة وقعت له في طفولته كانت السبب المباشر في تجسيد شعوره بالخوف، وذلك عندما أرسله والده بملاحظة في ورقة صغيرة إلى ضابط المخفر القريب من المنزل. وما إن قرأ الضابط الرسالة القصيرة حتى ألقى القبض على الطفل ذي الأعوام السبع واحتجزه لدقائق في زنزانة مظلمة قائلا: هل رأيت الآن ما نفعله للأطفال الأشقياء؟ منذ ذلك الحين بدأ هيتشكوك يدرك معنى الخوف، ولا يعني ذلك بالطبع أن أفلامه كانت انتقاما من هذا الشعور أو تفريغا لعقدة نفسية دفينة، بل على العكس كانت حياته الخاصة مثالية وهادئة تماما. تزوج مرة واحدة في عام 1926 وزوجته ألما ريفال التي رافقته إلى نهاية حياته، وكان يذهب بانتظام إلى الكنيسة ويبتعد عن حياة مجتمع البيل إير الراقي في بيفرلي هيلز في هوليوود بقدر الإمكان، وكان شديد الخجل ومهذبا وميالا للسخرية حتى الأيام الأخيرة من حياته. على أي حال فإن ما يهمنا هنا التأكيد عليه هو اقتناع هيتشكوك الكامل بأن السينما هي فن التقنية.
This is the scene of the crime. A crime of passion, filmed in a way you have never seen before, and as no one else would dare attempt, but the screen's master of suspense, the producer-director who shocked the world with Psycho. This is the apartment of a man named Jeffries, a news photographer whose beat used to be the world. Right now, his world has shrunk down to the size of this window. He's been watching the people across the way. Nobody seems to pull their blinds during a hot spell like this. He knows a lot about them by now. Too much, perhaps. For instance, down there on the second floor, the woman pacing about. He calls her Miss Lonely Hearts. So lonely that even death seems like a friend. These are the newlyweds on a honeymoon no one will ever forget. He calls her Miss Hearing Aid, an artist of a very odd and strange art. The songwriter who plays the same melody over and over again. A genius or insane? This is the traveling salesman and his invalid wife. Out of their arguments and nagging comes a weird kind of love.
Those are just a few of my neighbors. First I watched them just to kill time, but then I couldn't take my eyes off them, just as you won't be able to.
And you won't be able to take your eyes off the glowing beauty of Grace Kelly, who shares the heart and curiosity of James Stewart in this story of a romance shadowed by the terror of a horrifying secret.
كنت أتساءل دوما حول الغايات التي تحققها أفلام هيتشكوك وأسلوب التشويق بوجه خاص. أتصور أنها تحقق غايات مركبة. إن التشويق أحيانا وسيلة لدى هيتشكوك في جعل المشاهد يشارك في تجارب الشخصية التي يراها على الشاشة. التشويق ينبع أحيانا من توتر لدى المشاهد بين استجابات متصارعة، وهو أحيانا لا يمكن تمييزه تماما، حين يجعلنا هيتشكوك ندرك مدى تورطنا في رغبات وانفعالات مناقضة لما يثير إعجابنا. إنه إحدى وسائل مشاركتنا في أفلام هيتشكوك بأكثر من مجرد مشاهدتها كعرض عادي. ولكن هذا ليس تعريفا للتشويق، إذ ينبغي أن نحمل في أذهاننا المضامين الأخلاقية المركبة للتجارب التي نشارك فيها أبطال هيتشكوك أو التي ينقلها إلينا هذا المخرج. وسواء اعتبرنا تكنيك هيتشكوك في محاورة جمهوره نوعا من العلاج أو اللعب، فمن المؤكد أنه تكنيك يقوم على فهم أخلاقي. فهم الأخلاق لدى هيتشكوك مركب ومعقد تماما، ويجب أن نشاهد مجموعة كثيرة من أفلامه حتى نصل إلى الرموز الترميز في أفلامه المتعلق بالأخلاق. والأخلاق ليست بسيطة وسهلة في أفلام هيتشكوك كما يتصور البعض، ليست أبيض وأسود، وبالذات في فيلم الدوار أو الدوامة. جنبا إلى جنب يمكن وضع هذه المقولة العلاجية مع سؤال أساسي حول روح الدعابة لدى هيتشكوك. فليس الأمر مجرد أن هيتشكوك يرى الجانب المرح فيما يقدمه بأكثر مما يراه محللو أفلامه، لكن الأمر هو أن أسلوب الدعابة عنده أساسي في عمله، وهو بالتأكيد يستخدم الدعابة كوسيط واع لإثارة الدهشة والتشويق، والعكس صحيح تماما.
How do you do? My name is Alfred Hitchcock, and I would like to tell you about my forthcoming lecture. It is about the birds and their age-long relationship with man. It will be seen in theaters like this across the country. In my lecture, I hope to make you all aware of our good friends, the birds. Theirs is a noble history, and through it all, man has played a conspicuous part. This cave drawing is one of man's earliest sketches of his feathered friend. One can see at once the loving care with which the artist depicted his subject. I hope you don't mind if I have something to eat, but I'm rushed today. Planning the lecture has been most educational for me. I've begun to feel very close to the birds and have developed a real sympathy for our little... What was I saying? Oh yes, I've come to feel very close to the birds and have come to realize how they feel when... I don't think I'll eat just now. Hardly proper with all of you here. Surely the birds appreciate all we've done for them. Don't you? Beautiful cage, fresh water, no other birds to bother you, none of that blinding sunlight. Oh! Now why would he do that? Most peculiar. What on earth?
They're coming! They're coming!
أعزائي المشاهدين، أشرت في صدر هذا التقديم إلى إيمان هيتشكوك الكامل بالسينما الخالصة، أي السينما التي تعتمد اعتمادا رئيسيا على الصورة. في نفس الوقت أشرت إلى ما أشار إليه بعض النقاد من تناقض بين اهتمامه الكامل والشديد بالسيناريو، بأن الفيلم يخرج مرة واحدة، وهذا تعبير لبيلي وايلدر، لكن هيتشكوك كان يطبقه حتى من قبل أن يستمع إلى هذا التعبير من بيلي وايلدر. كان يخرج الفيلم على الورق، يخرجه من حيث الموضوع، من حيث الحوار، ولكن بدرجة أكبر من حيث التقنية. عن اهتمامه الكامل بالتقنية قال هيتشكوك: لا يهمني الموضوع ولا يهمني التمثيل، ولكن ما يهمني هو القطع التي تصنع الفيلم. يهمني التصوير وشريط الصوت وكافة المكونات التقنية التي جعلت الجماهير تصرخ. إنما آثار الجمهور لم يكن رسالة الفيلم، ولم يكن أداء الممثلين الممتاز أو حتى استمتاعه بالرواية، إنما آثار الجمهور هو الفيلم الخالص. في نظر النقد الصحفي السريع والجمهور العام، فإن أفلام هيتشكوك هي أفلام إثارة، ولكن الواقع هو أن كثيرا من المركبات والخدع ومناطق الغموض في أفلام هيتشكوك واقعة في منطقة تمويه، يعني مختفية خلف تعريف سهل لهذه الأفلام على أنها أفلام إثارة، غير أنه على طول امتداد الحياة الفنية لفنان الإثارة في قرننا كانت هناك حدود مثيرة للفضول. قد أوضح هيتشكوك على الدوام بأنه لا يشعر بأدنى اهتمام بالعصابات ورجالها وبجرائم المحترفين وبتخطيط عمليات العالم السفلي، حتى في أوج ازدهار فترة أفلام الإثارة السوداء في هوليوود في الثلاثينات والأربعينات، وهو النوع الذي عرف به الفيلم نوار. فإن هيتشكوك لم يفكر في دخول عالم كاتب مثل ريموند تشاندلر بشوارعه الحقيرة وخيالاته الكئيبة، فقد كان هيتشكوك يرى الجريمة كحدث خاص وليس كحدث في عالم المخبر الخاص. قيل ذات مرة أن كل فيلم الهيتشكوك هو بمثابة عقد مع الجمهور، شروطه ضمنية مضمنة في داخل بنوده، ولكنها غير غامضة. يتولى هيتشكوك بموجب بنود هذا العقد تزويد الجمهور بانفعالات معينة. دعونا نجرب هذا العقد الآن مع الجزء الثاني من فيلم الدوامة لهيتشكوك، ولنا لقاء بعده إن شاء الله. شكرا لكم. أهلا ومرحبا بكم مرة أخرى أعزائي المشاهدين.
Scotty, do you believe that someone out of the past, someone dead, can enter and take possession of a living being?
No.
فكرة التلازم بين الحب والموت والمحاولة الدؤوب لإعادة موضوع الحب الميت إلى الحياة، وهي الفكرة التي راح ضحيتها سكوتي في الجزء الأول قبل أن تتطهر ذاته عبر معاناة قاسية في الجزء الثاني، فيشفى من خديعة الحب والخوف من الأعالي وعقدة الذنب في آن واحد. هذه الفكرة أوروبية تماما، وليس هذا غريبا، فمؤلفة القصة فرنسيان، ولعلها سبب من أسباب إخفاق الفيلم في توصيل رسالته للجمهور عند عرضه الأول بالذات في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في عام 1958. ففي مجلة عارضو الأفلام الأمريكية نشر مقال عن الفيلم يقول ما مفاده أنه غامض وبطيء وقد لا يستهوي الجمهور، في الوقت الذي ذهب فيه ناقد صحيفة اللندن أوبزيرفر إلى أن نصف الساعة الأخير من الفيلم راكد كبقعة مياه في خندق. غير أن الفيلم عند إعادة عرضه قبل ترميمه ب12 سنة، أي في عام 1984 حين عرضت النسخة القديمة، جذب رافضا شابا كان رافضا بشدة في عام 1958 للفيلم، وهو الناقد الشهير أندرو ساريس. عاد يكتب ليقول: ربما كان الدوامة هو أعظم وأعمق وأجمل فيلم فني تم إنتاجه على الإطلاق فوق تراب القارة الأمريكية. ربما كان فعلا. تتجلى عبقرية هيتشكوك في أكثر من مشهد، منها تلاعبه بالإضاءة في أول ظهور قريب لكيم نوفاك لكي يعطي إشعاعا غير أرضي حولها، وذلك في مشهد المطعم. والمناسبة كان هيتشكوك يعذب نوفاك بإعادة لقطة الانتحار في خليج سان فرانسيسكو أكثر من مرة، رغم علمه بأنها تكره الماء ولا تستطيع السباحة. شاهدنا أيضا تلاعبه بالإضاءة عند خروج جودي كيم نوفاك الثانية بعد تبديل ملابسها لأول مرة ليراها سكوتي وسط غلالة خضراء منبعثة فعليا من أضواء النيون الخارجية، ولكن المعنى واضح في الإيحاء ببعث صورة المحبوب الميت مرة أخرى للحياة. وليس أقل ما تمثلت فيه عبقرية هيتشكوك في تسخير التقنية للتعبير الدرامي المنشود من تلك اللقطة التي لا تستغرق على الشاشة سوى ثانيتين، وتكلفت نحو 19,000 دولار في عام 1957، والتي نفذها هيتشكوك بوضع الكاميرا على قضبان وتحريكها للخلف في الوقت الذي ينقض فيه بعدسة الزوم إلى الأمام. اختراع هيتشكوكي ماركة مسجلة خالصة جسد معنى الدوار بوضوح حين نرى الأشياء الجامدة تتلوى لتؤكد هذا المعنى. هذا مثال ممتاز للسينما الخالصة. هذا قليل من كثير سيخبرنا عنه الفيلم القصير التالي، مسكون بالدوامة، أو حياة جديدة لتحفة هيتشكوك، كما شارك في صنعها خبير الترميم وإعادة الروح للنسخ السينمائية المفقودة روبرت هاريس وجيمس كادز في عام 1996، وهما للتذكرة اللذان أنقذا هذه الروائع، لورنس العرب وسبارتاكوس وسيدتي الجميلة من قبل. ويفتتح الفيلم ويختتمه المخرج الأمريكي مارتن سكورسيزي.
This is hallowed ground to movie buffs. In 1957, Alfred Hitchcock came to the Golden Gate Bridge to create one of the most extraordinary and memorable images in motion picture history. This is the place where Jimmy Stewart jumped into San Francisco Bay to save Kim Novak in Vertigo.
When Vertigo was first released, it wasn't one of Hitchcock's greatest hits, but time does things to movies in the way we see them. Today, many people regard Vertigo as Hitchcock's masterpiece, but along the way, it was almost lost to us forever.
The first time I can remember seeing Vertigo was at its first release here in New York, and I saw it in its original VistaVision projection with Hitchcock's extraordinary use of color. Over the years, I kept being drawn and drawn to the picture, like being drawn into a whirlpool of obsession. A very, very beautiful, comfortable, almost nightmarish obsession. And I think, for me, I found it fascinating years later when I look back and realized that towards the end of the studio system, such a highly personal movie could come out of that studio system with major stars.
In 1951, Alfred Hitchcock came to San Francisco for the opening of Strangers on a Train. The master of suspense always liked to show the audience a familiar setting and then introduce an unexpected twist of malice. As he studied the visual splendor of the Golden Gate Bridge, Hitchcock was heard to remark that San Francisco would be a good location for a murder mystery.
He loved San Francisco. He felt it was a very glamorous city. He felt it was rather like an American Paris. That's how he described it. He felt it was very cosmopolitan, more so than any of the cities he had seen at that time.
It would take 6 years before the romantic and mysterious images forming in Hitchcock's imagination would find their way to the screen. Working for Paramount in the 1950s, he made a string of remarkable movies, beginning with Rear Window and culminating with Vertigo. Universal Studios was Hitchcock's creative home for the final decades of his career. Here, Vertigo would be rescued from the ravages of time by Robert Harris and James Katz.
We chose Vertigo as a candidate for restoration for two reasons. Number one, it's a great film. It's one of the most important films ever made. Number two, the film elements themselves, both picture and sound, were in dire need of preservation.
Vertigo is also a film that audiences have not seen on the big screen for years, in fact 12 years. It was last released theatrically in 1984, and the elements were poor to say the least. You don't just start a restoration, you have to do a lot of research. We bring in elements from all over the world to one place where we can look at them and assess the quality of the picture and the sound and decide at a certain point, can we do this at all? There are many films that are not possible to restore.
When we first opened the cans on Vertigo, basically what we found was a faded negative. Virtually looked in many scenes as though the negative had been dragged on the floor before it had been printed. And we had differential shrinkage between the yellow, cyan, and magenta separation masters, which really led us to restore the film in a totally different manner. Once a picture either has gotten to a point where it has not been preserved properly or it hasn't been preserved at all, then you need restoration. To preserve a film is a phone call, a purchase order, a lab order. To restore a film is a year to 2 years of work and major commitment.
Universal would commit more than $1 million to the restoration of Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock believed in what he called pure cinema, pictures without words. Once he had a setting in mind, his next step was to find a story. The French novel D'Entre les Morts, From Among the Dead, would provide the foundation for Vertigo. Hitchcock dispatched his longtime associate producer, Herbert Coleman, to begin preparations in Northern California and to find a Spanish mission for the picture's climactic scenes. The landscape of California's pioneer past would stand in eerie visual counterpoint to the scenes of modern San Francisco.
It was 1955, 41 years ago, when I first walked onto this plaza and knew instantly that Mission Old San Juan Bautista would be the location Hitchcock wanted to use in our picture Vertigo.
In this haunting romantic thriller, Detective Scotty Ferguson falls in love with a woman mysteriously drawn to places from the past, a trail leading to a mission bell tower. The original bell tower of San Juan Bautista was destroyed in a fire long ago. So Hitchcock and his artist would conjure up a new one out of paint and plaster. The script had to be perfect before Hitchcock would begin production. With his wife Alma, he would spend months on story construction before hiring a screenwriter. Playwright Maxwell Anderson was the first writer engaged by Hitchcock and Herbert Coleman.
And he turned in a screenplay called Listen, Darkling. And that will tell you the whole story. It was, no one could figure out what it meant. And the screenplay was exactly the same. So then we found another writer, Alec Koppel, who did a great improvement to Listen Darkling, but still not satisfactory. So then we started a search and found Sam Taylor.
Author of the play Sabrina Fair, filmed twice as Sabrina, Samuel Taylor would spend a year working with Hitchcock on the Vertigo screenplay.
In those first talks, we decided that the more emotion there was in the man, the stronger the picture would be. And he found, without even thinking about it, that he was making a picture that went much deeper than most of his pictures, just because the basic story, not the plot, but the basic story, had a true human emotion. This obsession of a man who, for the first time in his life, had fallen deeply in love.
Hitchcock's frequent leading man, James Stewart, was perfect casting as the detective with a fear of heights. Hitchcock was enthralled with the young actress Vera Miles. He planned to use Vertigo to build her into a major star. In early 1957, she posed for these hair and costume tests as Madeline. Vera Miles also modeled for this early version of the painting that features prominently in the story, the portrait of Carlotta.
Then is when we started encountering delay after delay, starting with Hitch's problems with his gallbladder. An operation was necessary. Then when Hitch recovered and we were all set to go, Vera Miles announced that she was pregnant and couldn't do the film.
Hitchcock was deeply disappointed, but he couldn't let go of his image of the cool, mysterious Madeleine. He finally chose Kim Novak as the incarnation of romantic fantasy in Vertigo. As the 2-year restoration progresses, Harris and Katz draw on state-of-the-art technical facilities at Universal and at laboratories throughout Hollywood. Restoring more than 1,000 pieces of film negative and using original Technicolor prints for reference, they experiment with modern film stocks and processing techniques to recreate the precise visual texture Hitchcock intended for every shot. Vertigo began principal photography in San Francisco in September 1957. During the 16 days of location shooting, Hitchcock's 45th feature was still titled From Among the Dead. Director and star had the support of Hitchcock's devoted staff, who emulated his British formality and quiet professionalism. Cinematographer Robert Burks carried out Hitchcock's color scheme of reds and greens and used fog filters to create a dreamlike atmosphere. The screenplay was followed religiously. Script supervisor Peggy Robertson made sure the shooting proceeded according to Hitchcock's meticulous preparations.
Every picture that I worked with him on was always storyboarded, and that would be one of the first requisites of his work. Hitch was the only director I've ever known who never looked through a camera. He didn't even stand close to the camera. He would say, "You got 3 inch on then, and you cut there." And he'd tell them where they cut, and he'd always be right. He just transformed himself into the camera eye.
Jimmy Stewart as Scotty created one of his most brilliant and complex character portraits.
Madeline, tell me.
No.
Madeline, tell me what it is. Where do you go?
No, I
what
can't
takes you
tell
away? When you jumped into the bay, you didn't know where you were. You guessed, but you didn't know.
I didn't jump, I fell. You
Why
told
did
me
you
I
jump?
fell.
Why did you jump?
I think Jimmy personified for my father every man, so that when people went to see a picture, they could put themselves in Jimmy's place. And especially in Vertigo, he wanted the audiences to identify with Jimmy, which is what everybody did.
Hitchcock molded Kim Novak into the strange, aloof Madeleine and into Judy, her earthier reincarnation. In perhaps the finest performance of her career, Novak brought a startling emotional intensity to her dual role.
It excites me to work on dual personalities because I think I have many myself. And I think that I was able to use so much of me in that movie. And working with Alfred Hitchcock, I adored working with him because, well, at first I was feeling insecure because I kept saying, well, now, is this right? How do you want me to play this character? And he said, I hired you, and that's why I want what you bring to this role. But what I do expect from you is to stand where I want you to, wear what I want you to, and speak in the rhythm that I want you to. He worked a long time with me to try to get the right rhythm.
We were forbidden to play here. Sister Teresa, fooled us.
Look at this. Here's your gray horse.
Madeline had the complication and the excitement and energy underneath. It was all very, very held back on the outside, but underneath there were so many things going that I think that's part of what fascinated Jimmy Stewart, caused him a compulsion to want her, to possess her.
Well, what is it?
Could I ask you a couple of questions?
What for? Who are you?
My name's John Ferguson.
When he opens the door, do you know, and that feeling of wanting to go to him, of wanting to run away from him, wanting to, you know, all of these mixed conflicts all at one time. It just was really, really powerful.
What's this doohickey?
It's a brassiere. You know about those things. You're a big boy now.
Scotty's friend Midge was played with great sympathy by the highly acclaimed stage and screen actress Barbara Bel Geddes.
Hitchcock was a wonderful director. I remember he came up to me, I think that first day, and it made me laugh so, because he said, "Now, Barbara, don't act. Don't act." And that's all he said to me, you see. I remember a scene at the drawing board where Midge was talking and drawing at the same time, and he'd say, "Barbara, look up," and I'd look up.
Aren't you ever going to get married?
You know there's only one man in the world for me, Johnny-O.
You mean me? We were engaged once, though, weren't we?
And he'd say, "Now look down," and I'd look down. And he'd say, "Now look left," and I'd look left. Anyway, he said, "That was what, cut, very good," you see. So that was that.
The most celebrated of Hollywood's costume designers, Edith Head, shared Hitchcock's fondness for the use of color to heighten emotion.
Edith loved working with Hitch, and Vertigo was a real challenge because he had very, very definite ideas about what he wanted Kim to wear, especially this gray suit. Now, Kim did not want to wear gray, but Hitch was absolutely definite about that. She had to wear gray. Gray is not really a blonde's color, and there was something off-putting about it, but that was the psychology of the whole thing. Edith and Hitch wanted this to be a very, very dramatic gown when she's seen at Ernie's, and it is absolutely sensational. When Kim makes her entrance, every eye is upon her because she's absolutely breathtaking. And then when she went to Jimmy Stewart's apartment, she wore this magnificent white coat. Hitch was very definite about the kind of costumes that he wanted and the colors. And of course, white on a blonde is perfect. And it has a black chiffon scarf that goes through here and drapes down the back. And even that had a sense of mystery about it because the wind would catch this and mysteriously whip around her. You know, it all had a very eerie effect to it. But that was Hitch's genius.
There's someone within me, and she says I must die. Oh, Scotty, don't let me go.
I'm here.
The production moved back to Hollywood for 2 months of shooting at Paramount Studios. The art director was Henry Bumstead. This was one of 4 films he designed for Hitchcock.
Everything is a set. Hitch liked working in the comfort of the stage, and he didn't like to shoot in real locations, on interiors. He'd get the exterior, I think he was a master of that, get all the meat on the exterior, and then you would build the set on the stage where he could control the lighting and his actors.
Bumstead designed more than 50 individual sets for Vertigo, including the interior of the Mission Bell Tower. Hitchcock himself was once a set designer. His original pencil sketch for the San Francisco Club was first transformed into a painting and then into Bumstead's richly textured set. Hitchcock drew these steps for Jimmy Stewart's dive into San Francisco Bay. The central metaphor of Vertigo was graphically rendered in Henry Bumstead's expressionistic set for the Bell Tower. 70 feet high, the set gave Hitchcock's stars a real feeling of vertigo. The much-imitated vertigo effect was achieved by a combination of zooming forward and tracking backward simultaneously. After much trial and error, filming on a full-size set proved impossible, so they used a large-scale model of a staircase. Turned on its side, it was filmed by special effects cameraman John Fulton to make the audience feel as dizzy as Jimmy Stewart. Legendary composer Bernard Herrmann contributed immensely to Vertigo's emotional impact. His hypnotic, intensely romantic score is one of the most memorable in movie history. Hitchcock's favorite composer was the instrument of the director's innermost feelings. Saul Bass revolutionized the art of title design in the 1950s by using a single graphic image to capture a movie's mystique. Hitchcock's recurring spiral motif was abstracted by Bass to evoke the psychological vortex of vertigo. His main title sequence and poster have made that image an indelible part of our movie landscape. The last step in the 2-year restoration process is putting picture together with sound. In the Hitchcock Theatre at Universal, Robert Harris and James Katz supervised the meticulous reconstruction of Vertigo's soundtrack in 6-channel DTS stereo.
Surrounds at the moment. How high? Yeah.
When you talk about restoration, you're talking about picture and you're talking about sound. I mean, these, we may be working on a picture for months and then working on the sound for months, and we never see them together. That's one of the really exciting things that happens when we finally are able to put the sound and picture together and see what it's really going to look like.
Vertigo has been given new life, its magnificent images no longer worn and faded. Thanks to this painstaking labor of love, the haunting vision of a master filmmaker will astonish and obsess movie audiences for generations to come.
We're leaving enough films so that we can get Vertigo, hopefully through at least the next 200 years.
Vertigo somehow stands out, and I think it stands out because it was unabashedly personal. And I think it's where the truth lies in the picture, and that's why I think it sustains over the years. And you don't know exactly, well, the person who made this feels this way or whatever. You can't put it into words, but there's something that's genuine about it, and that is just not dealing with the schematics of plot or whatever. That has a very strong heart behind it, and a very, very troubling look at humanity in a way, but it's something that's honest and true, and that has a great deal of psychological complexity, and that's lasted over the years.
لا أعتقد أنه يمكن إضافة شيء في التعليق على ما رأيناه من احتراف كامل وصناعة سينمائية حيوية، بأكثر من أنه لو ما كان هذا ما كان ذاك. ففي قلب هذا كله كان هيتشكوك يبدع روائعه، خاصة في مرحلته التي أصبح فيها أستاذا للتشويق على صلة وثيقة بعلم النفس، وهي المرحلة التي امتدت بين عامي 1955 و1960، وعلى الأخص في أفلامه الثلاثة: الدوامة في عام 1958، وشمالا بطائرة نورث ويست في عام 1959، وسايكو في عام 1960. بهذا أصل معكم أعزائي المشاهدين إلى ختام حلقة هذا المساء من برنامج عيون السينما. إلى أن ألتقي معكم في حلقة جديدة مساء يوم الجمعة المقبل على خير إن شاء الله. أرجو لكم جميعا أوقاتا طيبة ومفيدة وممتعة. شكرا لكم وتصبحوا